An officer had an 18-pound slop bucket dropped on his head at the Elmira Reformatory, New York, on September 18th, 1923. A little history today, and then we're going to talk about history repeats itself and why we need good training and good leaders to help prevent officers from being attacked. Hi, I'm Gary York, True Prison Stories. Please subscribe if you like this video. Elmira Reformatory, New York was founded in 1876. Today it is called Elmira Correctional Facility and is a maximum security prison in New York. I'm going to read from the original article to you, and we're going to see how history repeats itself and what we need to do to protect our officers better. It seems to be getting worse, actually, in 2024, in these new days of technology. I'll read it as it was back in 1923. They used the word guard. Please disregard that. We know it's correctional officer. Guard Gilbert is a visitor at the reformatory. Announcement is made in the Saturday issue of the Summary, the weekly publication of the inmates of the Elmira Reformatory, that guard Lewis B. Gilbert, who was assaulted at the institution last May by Frank Flecto, an inmate, and has been confined to his home since paid a visit to the institution last week. The summary says, Mr. Gilbert sufficiently recovered from his injuries of the early summer, paid a visit to the institution one day last week. Mr. Gilbert suffered a fractured skull when Flacco hurled an 18-pound slop bucket on his head from an upper cell tier. He will not be able to return to his duties for some time. Flacco is now in the Auburn State Prison. An 18-pound slop bucket fractured Officer Gilbert's head. Thank God he made it and could not return to his duties for a period of time, but he went to visit the facility. This guy is not going to back down, is he? He's not going to let that fractured skull stop him from going back to work. I want to talk about how history repeats itself. We today, in 2024, are seeing more assaults on officers than I think I've ever seen. You know, I retired in 2018. Did 28.8 years in the prison system and the jail system, and it just seems to be getting worse. So what's happening? Well, some institutions are at 53% vacancy, so we have staff shortages. Inmates are running free, doing things they're not allowed to do. Why? Well, one reason is not enough officers available to watch everything. Number two, complacency could be taking place. Officers are giving up and becoming complacent and just letting things happen. So what do we need? We need good leadership. We need good training. Two high things on my list. Train, train, train. In the military, they train before, even during your time in combat or during your time as being deployed on standby, you're training. And after everything's over and you come back from your deployment, you continue training. Train, train, train for whatever your MOS is, as they call it in the military. Well, our MOS is corrections. We need to train, train, train before, of course, and during and after. And we need to be reminded of our training. That's where good leaders come into play. A good leader will come and check on you and say, is everything okay? Don't forget, stay alert, keep your head on a swivel, and every now and then throw a little training tip in there. I remember Lieutenant Shock would come by and say, you know, when you're doing your counts, folks, make sure when you're on the bottom that you stay under that bottom tier. Don't stand outside and look from a distance, even when you're doing your security checks or just doing your rounds. Get under that tier and walk. Why? Because what you've done now is you've eliminated the possibility of someone throwing something down on your head from the upper tier, as the story I just read from 1923, where the slop bucket came down from an upper tier and fractured Officer Gilbert's head. Now you've limited up there. Now you don't have to worry about what's going on above you, something falling on you. Now your concentration is where it needs to be, doing your security checks, your rounds, or your counts. You're protected up here. You still have to have your head on the swivel where you're at and on the lower tier. I remember Sergeant Marshall saying, when we have an incident and we have to grab someone out of a fight or out of a cell, felony cuff, right away. Why? Because in the heat of the moment, that inmate can turn on you and attack you. I remember Sergeant Stanley Smith saying, oh, they don't want to cooperate. I'm going to authorize a lockdown. I'll call it in, but I'm going to lock them down for now. Lock down the whole dorm. Why are good leaders important? These are just 3 examples I gave you. Good leaders want to protect their officers. Good leaders want their officers to go home safe at night. And they're constantly reminding their staff, okay? I remember Lieutenant Bain at briefing always gave an example before we broke back to go to work. At briefing, he showed us a picture of an officer at Hardee Correctional Institution who was sliced up by an inmate with a razor, and it was a bad photo, folks. A reminder at briefing to keep our head on a swivel. Why did Lieutenant Bain show us things like this at briefing? To remind us of the dangers that we're going to walk into. To remind us to pay attention and don't become complacent. To remind us we are in a dangerous environment 24/7. Don't let your guard down. Another example of a good leader. Good leaders pay attention to what's going on. Good leaders make their rounds to check on their officers. Good leaders back you up when you are doing your job, when you're doing it correctly. If you're not doing it correctly, what does a good leader do? Not in front of the inmates, not in front of the officers. A good leader talks to you later on, to the side, and says, hey, this has happened, you know, and this hasn't occurred in your dorm. This is what happened. This is what you need to do in those incidents, in those times of need. This is what you need to do. They train you even while we're on shift. That's right. Training before, training during the shift. Remember, training before, during briefing. Training during the shift, corrective counseling to the side. Training after the shift is our, you know, we have our mandatory training. Train, train, train. Good leaders, head on a swivel. I wish I could help the staff shortage problem, and hopefully we can get that fixed, because that is very, very important to have the right amount of staff on duty to do the job. Just a few things to keep in mind so we don't end up like Sergeant Gilbert did in 1923. Thank goodness he recovered from that terrible accident. 18-pound slop bucket, folks. That could have killed him instantly. Very lucky man. And I wanted to use that as our example today. Stay safe, everyone. Head on a swivel. Train, 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 and know your policies and procedures. And listen and pay attention. Please don't become complacent. Thank you.